Good morning to everyone. It is our pleasure to welcome you again on the third day of 9th SANEM Annual Economist Conference. And now we are going to have a plenary session, and it has got a very interesting title, Romancing Reform. Romancing the Reform, the Bangladesh Story. So we are very glad to have Professor Hemant Sohan sir as the guest or distinguished guest or special guest of this session. The keynote speaker is Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue. And we also have a distinguished panelist, Mr. Mohammad Muslim Chaudhary, former Comptroller and Auditor General of Bangladesh and former Finance Secretary, Government of Bangladesh. Dr. Rashidul Mahmoud Titumir, the Economic Advisor of the Government of Bangladesh. He was supposed to be here, and actually he confirmed that he would be here. But at the very last moment, he said that there is a very urgent meeting this morning with the Honorable Prime Minister, and he had to kind of send his regret. But I'm quite sure the kind of discussion what we'll have today in this session will try to convey the message to him. So my job is to moderate, not to say any extra words, because we have very distinguished panel here. So I will just facilitate the session, and because of the fact that the presentation will be shown on the screen here, so I have requested the distinguished guest to sit on the first row of this audience. So with this, I now request Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya to make his presentation.
Good morning, everybody. সবাইকে সুপ্রভাত, শুভ নববর্ষ। আপনারা কতজন, how many of you don't follow Bengali? Please raise your hand. Okay. I almost got into Bengali mode in that way in this morning, but I will keep it in English. But there are some jokes which sounds better in Bengali than in English. Okay. Let me start by thanking and congratulating Selim Raihan. Selim Raihan is one of the leading lights in our economist community, and you all know him by his performance. His expertise is very well recognized. I have had the good fortune of seeing it from very close quarter when we drafted the white paper on the state of the economy recently, a couple of months, years back by now. Okay. But I congratulate him much more because very few economists would have, at the same, beyond ideas, also the ability to be an organizer. So Selim Raihan really brings those two qualities together. So now here we are at the 9th SANEM conference over here, and he has kept the South Asian flag flying as well. So I'm very happy that we have colleagues from other countries as well. So I'm waiting for the clap. Yeah, that is much better. That's much better. So and it is also a bit of a privilege for me to have my guru and founding chair of CPD, Professor Hemant Sohan, as a part of this session. It's an extraordinary circumstances, and it gives me always a mixed feeling because what you are going to say in these circumstances. I am also very happy that Mr. Mosleuddin is here. He is a man of his own rights. He had been the ethics and moral and competence within the bureaucracy in the recent past. I have had the opportunity of seeing him from close quarter. I'm so happy that he is here today. My colleague, former colleague, and currently assuming the high position of being the advisor to the Prime Minister, unfortunately is not here. But I'm sure the media and others will take the message from here to him and to others as well. So as you can see that My presentation is called Romancing the Reform, the Bangladesh Story. I would like to acknowledge the contribution of my junior colleagues, Maliha. Maliha, please get up. She is a graduate from Brack University. And I also have Masham. Masham is a graduate of East West University. As you can see that we are, thank you, continuing what you call the tradition of being Guru Shishyo in Bangladesh as it goes, and they're here as well. So I'm very happy that they're here too. So let me start by saying, why do I call it the romancing the reform? In the recent time, the word Sanskar, or the reform, has become very popular. You may all remember that after the change in government in 2006, when the so-called 111 government came, the term reform became, after some time, politically pejorative. And again, this term has now come back, has made a return into the vocabulary, both in the popular vocabulary and also in the erudite discourse. And all of a sudden, a reformist is supposed to be a progressive person and a forward-looking person. And to that extent, we are now obsessed with the word reforms, that it is now being considered the solution to our constitutional problems, to how to set up our cricket board. So all reforms are now across the board over there. So and the issue of why I call it romance, because the romance, I could have called it elegy, but maybe some other time. But the romance issue is that you need to have love and affection, but there are also heartbreaks, and there are also moments when you need some adventure to carry on. But more importantly, you'll have to have your sense of humor so that you don't lose your patience and your drive in that way. So that's how I called it a romance, because the elements of all the romance are built into the process of reforms. I will be very fast, and the issue is that it is an enigma. It is the last frontier, the challenge for an economic policymaker or an applied policy analyst, that you will have to have, and there is no specific theory or a policy practice, because at the end of the day, all reforms are very contextual. But all your prior experience may not be very useful in this case. And more importantly, you'll have to be very conceptually robust. You'll have to have very concrete solutions which are implementable, and they have to be cogent. A coordination and systemic approach becomes very, very important, and an economist will know that, how they are related. So the objectives of economic reforms also, as you know, sometimes it is overdue structural reforms, say, for example, loss-making state-owned enterprises. You may have to do macroeconomic stress, inflationary pressure, policy coordination between fiscal and monetary policy. These are important. But also, it can also be necessary to withstand the external pressure, export collapses, strengthening the efficiency of the private sector operation, complying with international conditionalities. If you're borrowing from IMF, you know what it means. We are going through one now. And it can be also politically motivated. You can give subsidies before the elections to win votes. And there can be also social upheaval to deal with social discontent, with inequality, and also corruption. It is up to you now to think, out of all these bullet points, 8 bullet points, which one fits in Bangladesh most? One of the possibly is the last one, definitely, the social upheaval, which all of a sudden creates a space or the need for reforms. How do you really assess the impact? It all depends on what we are trying to achieve. So there may be explicit impact, there may be spillover impacts, there may be immediate one, there may be future one, there may be positive, and nothing is extraordinarily or absolutely positive. There are negative spillovers. Cost benefit, not only economic terms, but also in social terms. The outcome depends on the scope, the modalities, the pace of reform, the sequencing of it. And anyway, at the end of the day, outcome of good reforms are a perception of the people at the end of the day. Perception matters. For assessing reforms, perception matters, and this perception is also quite disaggregated, because those who are now standing in the queue for filling up their tanks with petrol is one perception, and the farmer who is getting the petrol or diesel to do its borrow harvest is another perception. So these perceptions also differ. So we should not get, in the era of social media, too carried away by one perception or the other. This paradigm of reforms, as I mentioned, it may have various kinds of scope, modalities, and triggers, but here we have in the literature, if you do a literature review, you will find a couple of them. The first one is the most popular one, is the crisis hypothesis, that you have a crisis, status quo is broken, weakening invested interest, and create space for reform. Does it sound like Bangladesh? So this is the crisis hypothesis. But severity is also an important thing, that severe crises can also move the reform, not from downturn on business cycle, but much more disruption over here. Interest group resistance is very well known, also may sound like Bangladesh. There are powerful groups who will block your reforms. There may be war of attrition. Two fighting groups will try to get the control of the reforms. That is also happening. And then political mediation. Leaders can use the crisis as a method to go ahead. And then the perception matters, as I have said, all these things. Now, all these things may exist simultaneously. It is not mutually exclusive. And then it may delay the reform or accelerate the reforms. And the objective scope and sequencing and pacing of reforms is the demand at the end of the day. If there is something which is very common in all these cases, you need a commitment to reforms, but also some competence to deliver it, the capability of doing that. So it is not only that theoretically we agree to that, but it is your ability to deliver it. Take it from me and from others that designing a reform is much more easier than delivering it. Delivering is the real challenge over here, and that's where the romance starts. I will go very fast that global reform experiences are very well known. I just take from 1970 on, last 50 years. What are the last 50 years? The Reagan-Thatcher reforms. They responded to the 1970s stagflation and the market-oriented reforms of neoliberal policies. This is one. You have seen the Chinese reforms and opening up from 1978, the Deng Xiaoping's reforms. How you have seen how socialist market system was gradually liberalized and the market incentives were built in and global integration took place. The Russian perestroika and the East European reforms after the breakdown of Soviet Union, we have seen that how the shock therapy reforms were done in many cases with very bad outcome in certain cases. We have seen the Narasimha Rao Manmohan Singh reforms in 1991 that really brought back India into the global economy stage, and market liberalization, including the so-called license Raj, was dispensed with. And then in the most recent past, we have seen the Sri Lankan reform. The crisis, the economic collapse of 2022, and then the stabilization reform, and how they did much better than us. That itself is also a learning point over there. Bangladesh is also not new in reform realm. The courting with reform, which that comes along with romancing, the courtship. So courtship of reform started immediately after independence. Professor Sovan is present here, who had been pioneer of that at that time. Dealing with the abandoned properties, the state-owned enterprises were created. We created new institutions at that time, Bangladesh Bank, setting up TCB, and many others over there. So, immediately after independence, I think the beginning of the reforms in Bangladesh can be traced back to. But after that, if you go through the 1970s, 80s, we got the market deregulation, government privatization, and selling of properties and other things, trade liberalization and market liberalization domestic was important. I think I will also remember, this is a selective memory, incidentally. You may find many things missing here. Then the local government reorganization ordinance in 1982, leading to conversion of Thana into upazilas. You remember General Ershad's creation of the upazilas at that time. The structural adjustment programs, the World Bank and IMF put it in at that time, and Bangladesh had a planned holiday, and then we had 2 sequences of private adjustment, structural adjustment programs. Incidentally, that was the time Mr. Titumir was working with me, and we have had authored books together on that. Introduction of the VAT by Mr. Saifur Rahman, possibly the biggest, one of the most important, if not the important reformist of the finance sector. So it was the introduction of the VAT on that. And the other one, of course, which will come later, is the adoption of the managed floating exchange rate. These two will go, maybe attributed to the biggest contribution of Mr. Saifur Rahman. But at the same time, we have the social protection scheme, the elderly allowance. This was done by in 96, 97, the government at that time. The first tenure of Sheikh Hasina, that was when it was done. But at the same time, Mr. Kibriya at that time confronted the flood. And this is when we all economists, we were part of the macro advisory team of the Indian finance minister, and we advised him to go for counter-cyclical measures, which was against the IMF recommendation at that time. And we used the Krishi Bank to pump in money into the rural area and prop up the demand at that time. So this counter-cyclical measures coming into place when the neoliberal policies were dominating was one of the major, I think, achievements of the Indian government. The so-called 111 government, the biggest contribution, of course, is the national identity card. Introduction of the national identity card in 2008, and we are still continuing with that and trying to improve upon it. And then in the 2010 onward, during the 3 years of the autocratic government or the no-election government, was an emphasis on digitalization. That we will have to accept. Now, what I'm trying to tell you, economic reform is not a one-shot thing. It's an ongoing process. And it has gone through various political regimes when the economic reforms on the side of it, they became one of the major substance of their economic governance at that time. And that remains so. I will come to that. Now, in the recent past, and this is something which I also partly borrow from Selim Raihan's works, that the kleptocratic legacy, how it really, stopped or slowed down the reform initiatives. We saw that when we see unchecked corruption, abuse of public resources, authoritarian regime born out of fraudulent elections in 2014, 18, and 24, led to centralized control, reinforced, disempowered local government, enabled collusion among the ruling politicians, bureaucrats, and the business people. And that's how the kleptocratic legacy really preempted the move towards reforms in the future. So we saw the crony capitalism, how it converted into oligarchy, and we created the term lutpat tantro. How do you really transform on that? So the creation of an anti-development alliance blocked reforms, eroded the integrity of the institution, paralyzed the non-state actors like us as well. So the white paper really revealed that the deceptive data lacks financial management, macroeconomic management problem, public finance pilferage, external sector imbalances, and the most vaunted development stories of the world at that time was built on shaky grounds and deep-rooted systemic flaws. This is the contribution of the white paper. So emergence of the coalition since we saw it from 2014 and onward, and how they have blocked the reform process on that. So what is the key manifestations of that what really blocks reforms in this country, in the history. Number one is political interference. Political guidance and political leadership is important, but political interference is a different thing when you bring in elite interest in this group. Resistance to reform onto economy-wide policies and structural change. You may agree to some reforms on these certain areas, but you do not want to agree on economy-wide reforms when it comes to that, as we have seen. Protectionism, blocking efficient incentive allocation. You allocate incentives, but it really goes to certain big houses or a certain sector, but it is not across the board for all sectors for that matter. The classic example is that the incentive we give to the garments industry, there was a time when 84 garments owners were there in a member of parliament in a 300 seats, and they really got most of the incentive, whereas domestic value addition where is high, like jute sector, leather sectors, and others are not necessarily accordingly rewarded. So we have seen how the incentive structure also goes there. With my apologies to Mr. Musleuddin, the politicization of the civil service. Politicization of the civil service is one of the major fallouts which really stops the reform. And we have seen how the Prime Minister's office becomes this sole arbiter of the interest groups between the politicians, bureaucrats, and the business community over there. And the final one is the elite capture, what we call. The state itself gets captured by a certain group of people who do not necessarily have political identity. I call them perennial elites. They survive across the regimes, so that it goes. So how do you really move from here? So the point we make on the white paper and we make is that if there is an anti-reform coalition and we need to go to a progressive settlement, na? Apnara bolen na notun bondobosto. So if you want to go to notun bondobosto, what you need to do if the new settlement? So there are the reform measures which are going to break the relationship between the anti-reform coalition and bring about the progressive settlement. I come here to mention you the sad news that reforms often fail. But why do they fail? They fail because of political and institutional barriers. I don't go through this because the will and the ownership is very critical in these cases. The design and implementation flaws, we do not design it properly, we do not really do stakeholder consultation properly, and we have corruption and rent-seeking behavior still continuing in the process. The third one is the resource and the economic constraints, because it needs money. You are going to lose money somewhere, you need money to give somewhere, and if you do not have adequate revenue collection, you do not have access to concessional external finance, obviously these are also going to be a major issue. You go on thinking within yourselves, which of the items are more relevant for Bangladesh? That is what my challenge to you. The history, if you go into, there are many rollbacks of reforms. Reform starts, but it falls. And it loses its steam, and obviously sometimes loses its path. I have used that term for case of the caretaker government, whether the government has lost its path and steam. If you go back into history, I reform here, even the Russian market economy reforms which were there in the 90s really slowed down and did not really succeed ultimately and increased the state influence back into the process. Hungary, democratic reform, thankfully Mr. Orban is not here anymore. He has lost the elections, but Hungary's urban experience is also a rollback of that kind of reforms. In Turkey, you remember Turkey has gone through a turbulent past in the last 20 years before Mr. Erdogan came in, Ahmadinejad came in. There was a coup attempt, and there was the same thing in the sense, not only economic reforms, but also reforms of the state approach, particularly the role of religion in this case. So the history of humanity, or in the recent experience, is also full of experiences where the reforms have been rolled back and it has failed. So let me come to the major crux of the problem. The most pro-reform government Bangladesh has ever seen in terms of articulation was the caretaker government. We were part of that up to a point when we wrote the white paper, but I will tell you how the history moved on. Now there is a broader consensus that the interim government did not succeed in making the necessary reforms. Why did it not succeed in that sense when it was so much, at least in words, was so much in favor of reforms? My first and foremost point is that this is an outsider-insider speaking, that it didn't have an economic vision. The different types of reforms were going on, but it did not come together into a vision or a master plan or what is the word nowadays so popular? Manifesto. The caretaker government did not have an integrated design, what he wants to achieve through the reforms. This was one of the major shortcomings on that. The second one, it was an legitimate government, it was a legal government, but it was not an elected government. When an election, if it is not an elected government, the ability to pursue reforms through political legitimacy is very weak. And that was also seen in the caretaker government, as we have seen. The government has inadequate capacity and coordination. That is also very well known, that they could not work as a team, both within and outside, in many ways. No systemic mechanism to do stakeholder outreach. Without the participation of the stakeholders, you really cannot sustain the reforms. The stakeholders outreach was even less when even came to, I'm talking about only economic reforms, not the political reforms. So the political reforms also cases, the stakeholder participation was weak. It could not really overcome the vested interest groups. The vested interest groups were very much there, whether it is in the banking sector, or whether it is non-banking, in the capital market, whether it is in the import sector, whether fuel or others, and also in the sense it was also at the grassroots levels when it came to procurement of agricultural products through fair prices and other issues. There was strategic communication was poor. The only person who was strategically communicating was the press secretary of the chief advisor. There was no politically effective communication, what they wanted to achieve and to mobilize the people. And in the era of social media, you understand how disastrous this can become. And then there was the issue of accountability and monitoring. There was no accountability monitoring mechanism, no live platform where you would like to go and see what is happening, what are the measures which are taken. At the final days, the caretaker government did produce a document where they have listed all the things they have done, but that was obviously too little, too late. And overall, the necessary requisite for successful reforms and ensuring its continuity into a new elected government was very much missing in case of Bangladesh. So the interim government, notwithstanding the chief advisor's multiple utterances, really did not leave what you call a substantive basis on which the future reforms can be taken forward. This is a very personal observation, that I have seen how the reforms during the caretaker government went through three phases. If you ask me to give evidence on each of them, I can give it, but Selim is looking at me and will not allow me to do that on that. So the first one is the initiation and progress. So it was the first 6 months, August to January and February. Mr. Musliuddin was part of that. He might be knowing much better than I do. He will tell his story. And then came in the slowdown and the confusion. We exactly didn't know where we are going or coming. And this was the time, January to February, another 6 months. But the last 6 months, if you see, the fading away is that when the economic reforms were overtaken by the political reforms issue on the consensus committee which was created, and they took over the whole discourse at that time over there. So I classify the three periods of caretaker government in these three definite on that. Now let me come to the modern situation. We now have a new government, which has come through with a pretty good elections in that way. And the first and foremost duty, and I'm approaching it from the reform point of view, not the political point of view. So had the 113 ordinances, many of them had reform agenda built into that. We know that the Parliament has approved the 91 and 20 ordinances not approved and require time frame for look into this. Out of them, 4 have been recommended for repeal. So what bothers us over here? There are a number of important ordinances which could have been dusted up and could have been also approved in this time, for which the government possibly has taken time. The first one is the Anti-Corruption Commission Amendment Ordinance. The second one is the National Human Rights Commission Act 2016. What they did, they have reinstated Sheikh Hasina's Human Rights Commission's Act in this case, so there is no vacuum in this case. The third one is the Prevention and Remedy of Enforced Disappearance and Ordinances. You must be hearing this debate going on in the Parliament and outside. The fourth is the Supreme Court Judges Appointment Ordinances. And along with that is there, where is that? Along with that is the setting up of the Independent Secretariat for the Supreme Court. That was the other one. Along with that, this came as a big surprise. And then the Police Commission Ordinance, it may not be perfect, but something was to be done in order to make the police system more accountable and also professional. National Data Management Ordinance, we as economists were very keen about this one, and this one also being annulled at that time, over here. And then comes in the Revenue Policy and Revenue Management Ordinance, NBR reform, as you know, bifurcation, and it was abrogated or done away with at a time when the revenue collection is the most critical factor, the last quarter of the fiscal year, and also when the demand for money is also at the highest. So this one is a political issue, and how we are going to deal with it, and how the issue of the role of the administrative officials within themselves, how they're going to affect the reforms is something to be seen. But on the top of all this discussion is, of course, the Bank Resolution Act 2026, of all the things which has happened. You know by now that the non-performing loans are the major drawback on our drawdown on our economy at this moment, and the government has finally given the name of the 20 top defaulters. And what really happened is that what you do with those banks which are really de facto bankrupt, can you really let them go bankrupt? It's a very strong political choice, very difficult one. So the last caretaker government, under the leadership of the then governor, tried to put 4 or 5 of them together. And they first, incidentally, to be fair to them, they first thought of making them bankrupt and push them out of the market. It was not politically acceptable. The second option was pairing a bad bank with a good bank. But no good banks really agreed to that. And it could not be forced upon them. So then the idea came, let us put them together, pump in some money, address their capital inadequacy, and really move forward. But then, as you know, out of these 5 banks, 4 of them belong to one of the top defaulters of those 20. The person who was 11 out of the 20 was really the 4 of the banks were there. And also the fifth one, if that was Esalom, this is NASA Group, I'm taking names, and they are the 5th one who are there. Here came in the most last moment amendments, and this is a very interesting thing. This is not the first time in the history it is happening in Bangladesh. This is in my memory, this is the second time I have observed that. There was a moment when I was part of the commission which did the Banking Company Act amendments back in Mr. Saifur Rahman's days, when we controlled the number of the sponsor directors and their tenure, not more than 2 and not more than 3. But Sheikh Hasina's time in the parliament, at the last moment, when it was being amended, somebody got up and gave an objection. And as a result, within 2 minutes, the draft was amended, and we got 3 years, 10 years, 3 times 10 years for the sponsor directors, and the number of the sponsor directors were increased from 2 to 4 or something like that. That was one of the very interesting, what you call a parliamentary coup of a economic reform approach. Almost the same thing happened here with the Bank Resolution Act 2006, that at the last moment, an amendment was brought in, not through the select committee or elsewhere, but through a parliament member and others, and then the government, where the government decided to put in a clause to allow the former owners to to put in some money, which is very small, and 12.5%, huh? 7.5%, sorry, I was being optimistic. So 7.5%, a very minimum one, and then they can claw back. And that is not also of the what the money they owe, but the money of the government. So obviously it was definitely comeback of the others, and we saw that this was approved, and this is how it remains. It is, the people talked about this is the comeback of the oligarchs in a new form and with political patronage possibly. You cannot do this without political patronage. This is where the unholy alliances takes place. And now the social protection issues, the number of cards we are having. I want a student card for you too. I want a researcher's card for me too in the future. So, and the cost of this, the coverage and etc. will obviously a challenge which you will see. I'm moving forward. Regarding moving forward, I want to base myself into what the BNP government has promised to the country in the future. The first, they have commitment to reduce political interference in the banking operation. Does the Bank Resolution Act amendment really goes with the operation what we have just said? Strengthening the central bank autonomy and supervisory power. The way the governor was changed, of course, does not create much confidence on this one as well. Legal action with the non-performing loan defaulters, we are yet to see that. Depositors protection, 2 lakh taka, good luck with that. Abolition of the banking division to reduce administrative and political overlap. You know there is a banking division in the finance ministry which controls the state-owned banks and others. The current finance minister on multiple occasions at the CPD's dialogue have promised that it will not be there, but it is still there. And last but not the least, they promised to create an economic reform commission. I once asked a minister, why you are not doing this? He told me, "Shobi to jana ache, we know what needs to be done. Why do you need a commission anymore?" So that was the answer. When I pushed that you need to bring all the reforms together, and it demands coordination and consistency, he said, "Lok koi, give me lokdan. Where are the people who can really man this commission?" My answer was simple. Pick anyone from my white paper committee. I didn't mean Salim Raihan. But I said that you pick anyone from the committee. That was one of the issues on that. So, 4 critical issues. I'm concluding. The issue is ensure, reveal what you have committed in your reform agenda, you have committed in the manifesto. Please put them in action. I don't want anything more, anything less. If you don't listen to me, you will listen to IMF. They are not disbursing your last installment. They are asking for a new understanding because they are unhappy with reforms. Because the last 2 months, the initial signs are not very encouraging as it stands. It's time to get up on that. The launching of the Reform Commission, but more importantly, how do you put these reforms into the upcoming budget in case of trade, investment, in case of collection of revenue, how the quality of the public investment will be there, how the financing of the budget deficit will be happening, what we do with the contingent liability, how do we review the subsidies, all the tax exemptions and the tax expenditures in these cases. And last but not the least, we'll have to have real-time data. We have learned one thing. Supplying reforms with good ideas is not good enough. You will have to have the voice of the citizens, constantly making it sure it is being delivered. So for that, most important thing is the evidence and real-time data to see how the progress is being made, both in terms of results and also in terms of intervention. This is my last one. Precisely, we want to do that task. We have set up the Bangladesh Reform Tracker and Manifesto Watch. First, it was only the Reform Tracker. Now we have added the Manifesto Watch, the pledges, the commitments, and how they are being delivered. You go to the website in our platform, you will find real-time data, what has been happening and what is not being there. So the point I'm making here, when it comes to the romance, is that you have to be always very vigilant about it. If you are not vigilant about your relationship, you may end up in the wrong side of it in that way. Vigilance is also part of the romancing in that way. For that matter, if you really want to go there, the last frontier of economic policy and application and advocacy, then you will have to have this vigilance through real information, real-time data, and keep our political masters on their toe. And with that message, I came here today, this morning. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Debabrata Bhattacharya. It was an excellent presentation and so much thought-provoking. I think, as you see in the Salem conference, it's not only the senior researchers or economists that they are here. It's a very wide participation of young students and young researchers. So they're very much benefited, I'm quite sure, that from this excellent deliberation.
Please give a big hand to the young researchers.
Thank you. So now we can go to our distinguished panelist, Mr. Mohammad Muslim Chaudhuri. Sir, would you like to speak from here or you want to? Okay, please.
Respected Professor Raman Swansar and our keynote speaker, Dr. Debabrata Bhattacharya, and our moderator, Dr. Salim Raihan, and the audience present. and Ronak Jahan, sir, madam. Dr. Bhattacharya's presentation was very wide and is covering the whole globe, rather, I should say. It's not only the Bangladesh, romancing the reform Bangladesh story, but it covers also the total worldwide, the different reforms in different countries. From my experience as a bureaucrat and subsequently in a constitutional post as Comptroller General, and also in recent past I was chairman of the Sonali Bank. So from practical experience, I would like to just identify a few of the reforms, and also some of the reforms are already is part of the manifesto of the current government. First of all, let me identify the financial sector one. In the financial sector, if we just make it at two divisions, one is the state-owned banks. You know that there are more than 5-6 banks, state-owned bank, and out of that banks, Janata, Sonali, Rupali, and Ogroni, these were made PLC at least 2 decades back. The PLC suffix added to the Sonali Bank or Janata Bank and Ogroni Bank with the intention that to make it true corporate structure, to put it into corporate structure. But very unfortunately, these banks still, after 20 years, still run as like an extension of a government, like. And so I think the priority of the new government should be that to bring these 4 or 5 banks, and if needed, some bank can be merged into the 4 or 5 banks can merge into 1 or 2, and that should be asset quality, and all this should be reviewed to make the balance sheet more real-looking and ultimately to make it in public listing. And at the same time, as already Dr. Bhattacharya also identified that to abolish the FID, to make it under the regulatory framework of the central government, and to make these banks for public listing. And as far as the other banks are concerned, I think already identified in the keynote, our keynote speaker also, many of the banks lost their balance sheet altogether. It's a negative net worth. So these should be taken either for liquidations or for some through other measures should be, the number of banks should be reduced. On the civil service side, I think though there are through various administrative reform commissions, civil service reforms, many reform agenda were identified, but for many reasons that didn't happen. At least this time, I think one of the big reform can automatically happen in civil service, that if you can separate central civil service, local government civil service from the central government. Instead of having a unified civil service for both central and local government, I think through some structural change, and of course with also the making some revisions, requisite revisions in the local government's laws, all the local government acts and rules and regulations, that local government civil service should be separated from the central government. And this can be a big reform in the civil service. There's a big platform for reform through this separation. As far as the part of the civil service, again, another one, as we know that some of the public service now are made through the digital platform. And that way, if I give you one example, that there was almost 6,000 to 7,000 people used to work in the government for disbursement of the pension. But during my tenure as finance secretary, through my initiative, there was a pension office created through which 12 lakh pensioners payment is done through digitally every month at the beginning. And through that intervention, already 6 to 7,000 people's involvement in that process of pension disbursement already faded away. But if you ask me, what happened to their 6 to 7,000 people? They are still there. Either they are not doing anything, or they are doing something else which can be easily dispensed with. I'm just giving you this example. This sort of initiatives in many cases has happened. And I think we have to immediately there will be some administrative, not that formal reform, but still some initiative through a task force systems or something that it can be taken, that's how to revisit the total employment structure of the civil service, and even needed, taking cue from the previous various administrative reform commission, I think immediate action-oriented tasks can be identified to rationalize the employment, civil service employment. Because of the digital intervention and nowadays through AI's interventions, many of the civil service work can be rationalized, and employees can be rationalized through this reform process. And in the NBR, though there was a...
Mr. Chaudhary,
Yes,
can I
please.
just, very kindly, I can just
Yes.
make a short interruption.
Yeah, sure.
Because since we are talking about the bureaucracy and civil service, and Dr. Bhattacharya also mentioned about the question of politicization of the bureaucracy.
Yes.
Yesterday in one of our panel also, it also came out very strongly. You know, since you are talking about bureaucracy, can you just elaborate on
Okay. And
how to avoid that?
Why do the bureaucrats become politicians?
if you have a strong political will and you have a fair environment you create for the civil servants, I think politicization can be minimized. And merit-based appointment, if encouraged and with a transparent accountability process, I think that can be reduced. And politicization in the bureaucracy, in fact, if you ask my opinion, that somehow, I don't know, it is a matter of research. From 91, the democratization started, and it's linked with democratization and the politicization of civil service. I don't know. Some evidence-based study might reveal this.
Good point.
So I think I don't know why this relationship is there. So politicization can be minimized with that.
Sir, if you allow me.
Yeah, please.
Mr. Manmohan Singh was also a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And he became one of the good prime ministers.
But-
so there can be good examples too.
Yeah, that can be also. But Manmohan Singh originally he was not a civil servant.
Academic.
He was academic, but he was made subsequently groomed as a civil servant when he entered into, you can call him as a lateral entrant. But I think that sort of mix-up also can be thought of. Lateral entrant, though if I say like this, my colleagues, I don't know how you would take it. I think that can be some lateral entry in the civil service also, mix-up of certain percentage. That can be also thought of. But the main thing is that all these things need strong political will. And about these, you know that already central banks sent 2 or 3 law revisions, which is pending in the Ministry of Finance, so to say FID, about the increase of independent director and also about the central bank got more autonomy. But I'm sure.
So if
Yes.
you allow me.
Yeah, please, sir. Yeah, please.
Oh, I come from Center for Policy Dialogue.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I believe in dialogue.
Yeah, dialogue. Yeah.
Yes, equivalent exchange.
Yeah, sure.
The issue, one is politicization regarding bureaucracy. The other there had been discretionary power they do not want to lose through reforms. So it is being said that one of the reasons why the caretaker government could not move very far was the reason that the pushback coming from the bureaucracy. That is one, and also the bureaucrats were brought back who have retired long time back did not have much to know about that. Would you say that the biggest roadblock for future reform are the bureaucrats? More than the elite businessmen.
This is more true was true for the interim government because of, as you said, that they didn't have the political legitimacy. But now we have a very strong government with a two-third majority. I think if this is true now also, that is very unfortunate. So I think it's a very strong government now. When a strong government gives a signal to the system that they meet business as far as the reform is concerned, I think bureaucracy is not the hurdle here. Bureaucracy thrives in terms of politicizations when they get they see that there is some tunnel created, opportunity tunnel, if I say so, then they jump into that tunnel. But if you block the tunnel, and if you just mean a business of transparency and accountability, okay, it's not working?
No,
Oh, it's working, okay, thank you very much.
not loud
So, not loud enough, yeah. I think, another one, I was thinking about the fiscal policy one. If you just visit, I'm sure Dr. Bhattacharya, he's a frequent visitor in the outlying, throughout the country, outlying visit. Everywhere you see in health infrastructure, education infrastructure, the physical infrastructure is there, but no machine working. If machine is there, machine is not working, and no software is there, that is, human resources are not there, and buildings, crores of money invested in physical infrastructure. I hope this time the government should be investing, diverting funds from physical infrastructure to the skill and education, not education, physical infrastructure, education and health, the skill, human resources, building human resources. This should be shifted, and instead of having a, if I say, jumbo-sized budget at the moment, you know that from my experience, as I was finance secretary, I made 1 or 2 budgets, and let me give the secret. First, you decide the 5% of GDP. Then decide the figure of expenditure, work back to the expenditure and the revenue. And we had we used to have the coordination meeting, and first thing when the NBR chairman just get into the meeting, we just give him the figure of estimated revenue, sir. This is your revenue you have to earn. We don't, because if he says that I cannot, but if you cannot, then my 5% doesn't match. So we have to come out of that system. We have to make the estimate reliably. And this time, I think, as the different papers and news are coming, that 17 to 25% and 9 lakh, 30,000 budget size. I'm not sure whether this 9 lakh 30,000 this time of the crisis is an appropriate figure.
NBR will work 48 hours a day.
Yeah, 48 hours a day. So I think that's, this time at least we have to take care of the austerity, yeah, and divert the fund to, and as far as the social protection is concerned, we have, you know, that social protection strategy is there, one policy is there. When we design new program, we have to make it evidence-based. Already there are 117 program of social protection run by 24 to 5 ministries. And their overhead cost is so high that if you just can reduce through some digitalization and centralization of the fund management, that savings can be used to make your coverage of social protection at least 20 to 30%. So that sort of study, but I'm not seeing any sign of that. We are having a social protection different scheme adding, But what happened to that 117 and mistargeting and integrations, that is not happening. Last, that was the, I'm sure I took much of the time. Last one. Sir is here because if I say all this, I think, I'm not sure whether Sir will take it easily or not, because Sir, when Sir was in the planning, that ADB, ACNEC, development budget and revenue budgets for separation. But I think time has come to abolish the development budget concept.
Integration of the two budgets?
Yeah, integration, not only two budget, even the term integrations. Instead of calling it a development budget, instead of calling it the ADP, because two stream of the process is making the resource wastages more. Because through ADP, you create a building. And through revenue budget, you create the organogram for running the building, for education, for health. But these two doesn't match. And that's why you will see throughout the country, through ADP, all buildings are, and it's a very romantic one to have the more building. You know that for what reason. So throughout the country, you see the educations and health, all the buildings are there. But when it comes to the revenue budget, believe me or not, manpower has been for 10 years, 20 years. Building 20 years old, no manpower assigned because of the separation of the revenue budget and development budget. So time has come through medium-term framework, 3 years rolling plan and all these, even if I say so, to make the planning commission abolished like Niti Aayog, like taking India, to make it like a strategic planning, some even renaming. But very unfortunately for the last 55 years, even we are very allergic to changing the name even. Even planning commission when it's called it. Sorry, sir.
But it is said that there are provisions within the Constitution which makes it necessary to make two budgets.
No.
That is, I remember Mr.
No.
Mohiuddin Khan Alamgir told me once.
Wrong. Constitution says you have to separate other expenditure from the revenue expenditure. That other expenditure means capital expenditure. That's the interpretation. So now that other expenditure, we made it development expenditure. And we made it a separate system for development expenditure. And through development initiative, development budget, we create the building infrastructure and all this. So I think this is one of the major reform. I think this should be the number one reform at the moment in the fiscal sector, in the development arena. So I think I should not take much of time because Sir is here. I think these are the points. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chaudhary. I think he added some very interesting insights, and he was an insider. So I think you can understand the kind of very inside knowledge and insights he can add to this very interesting and important discussion. So we'll open up the floor now. Can I see the hands? Okay. I request everyone to kindly please be very brief, ask question rather than comments, and also introduce yourself very briefly. Here, please.
Thank you. This is Tanvir Mohammad Dipu. I am a small business leader of private sector. Can I talk to Bengali and English mix?
Yes, please. Okay, open
Okay.
discussion can take place both English and Bangla.
জি আমি তিনটা পয়েন্টের উপর একটু বলতে চাই সেটা হলো প্রথম দুইটা পয়েন্ট দেবপ্রিয় স্যারের উপরে some people bad people destroyed the banking sector but unfortunately they are coming back again তারা আবার ফিরে আসতে চাচ্ছে এটা একটা অ্যালার্মিং এরা যদি ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরে আবার ফিরে আসে তাহলে আমরা প্রাইভেট সেক্টরের লোকজন দেখছি তারা কিভাবে হাজার হাজার কোটি টাকা এই দেশ থেকে পাচার করে নিয়ে চলে যাচ্ছে দুই নম্বর হলো ক্যাপিটাল মার্কেট বিগত 2-3টা সিকিউরিটি এক্সচেঞ্জ কমিশনের চেয়ারম্যান আমরা দেখছি বিগত 15-16 বছরে যে সমস্ত কোম্পানির চেয়ার টেবিল পর্যন্ত নাই তাদের কিন্তু আইপিও পারমিশন হয়ে গেছে ক্যাপিটাল মার্কেট থেকে। তারা হাজার হাজার কোটি টাকা ক্যাপিটাল মার্কেট থেকে এইভাবে লুটপাট করে নিয়ে গেছে। তো যার কারণে আমাদের একটা দাবি ছিল যে একটা ফিনান্সিয়াল রিফর্ম কমিশন তৈরি হবে, কিন্তু দুর্ভাগ্যজনক এই কমিশনটা হলো না। এটা কি আদৌ হবে, এটা আমার দেবপ্রিয় ভট্টাচার্য স্যারের কাছে আমার প্রশ্ন। থার্ড যে কোশ্চেনটা সেটা হলো মুসলিম উদ্দিন স্যারের কাছে। বাংলাদেশের রাজনীতি হলো একটা বিনা পুঁজির ব্যবসা। এখানে কোনো ট্রেড লাইসেন্স লাগে না, টিন সার্টিফিকেট লাগে না, শূন্য হাতে এখানে কোটি কোটি টাকার মালিক হওয়া যায়, ক্ষমতার মালিক হওয়া যায়। তো ভবিষ্যতে বাংলাদেশের সরকার, যেহেতু মুসলিম উদ্দিন স্যার সচিব ছিলেন অর্থ, তো এই রাজনীতিটাকে একটা বিসিএস ক্যাডারে পরিণত করা যায় কিনা। 27টা ক্যাডার আছে, আরেকটা ক্যাডার করে বিসিএস রাজনীতি এমন একটা ক্যাডার তৈরি করা যায় কিনা, মুসলিম উদ্দিন স্যার যদি এটার অ্যান্সার দেন। ধন্যবাদ।
আচ্ছা, ধন্যবাদ। নেক্সট কোশ্চেন প্লিজ। আমি একটু এদিকে দেখি, আমি আসবো। This side, is there any hand? Okay, so I'll take this question from the front. In fact, we probably will get a new perspective. Here, please. আমার দিকে একটু তাকাতে হবে যে মাইক্রোফোন দিচ্ছে এখানে সামনে। So he's from Nepal Rashtra Bank. So let's hear a bit of different perspective from Nepal. Yes.
Thank you, sir. So much illuminating and so much very erudite presentation. So I am from Nepal, and so we have an interesting contrast. Now we have like super majority government, and they are all young people. And you know, our prime minister is the youngest sitting prime minister, just 36 years old. And in the cabinet, the oldest member is about 50 years old. So my question is.
And the rest are doing policy dialogue.
Yes. yes. I mean, so my question is that now the government is moving very fast, because it has got a very strong mandate. And so what is your suggestions regarding the sequencing of reforms, and is it possible that we can go very fast, because they are now trying to revamp everything from corruption to the bureaucratic. Now they are saying they will have very sweeping reforms in bureaucracy, and the governance reforms was one of their major agendas. And already they have made so much changes, especially in public service delivery at the places where the public gets services.
Thank you.
Any
Thank you,
comments?
Rajan. I think we
Yes,
got
thank
your
you.
question.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so yes, the hand behind. Yes, I think he was raising the hand. Is there any hand this side, left side? Okay. না আপনাকে না, পিছনে।
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Nahid Islam. I'm a member of Network for People's Action, a new political platform. So my question to Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, and if Professor Sobhan could respond, that would be great as well. Bear with me, it would just take 40 seconds. It's a long-winding question. In case of Bangladesh, where there is no such thing as a national political party, rather very large interest groups who control the political economy of the country, best era of gradual development in Bangladesh was from 1991 to 2015-16, when Awami League was not still completely sure that they could retain power for full term with their unelected majority MPs. In short, when there is some sort of assurance of regular elections, which would be mostly fair. Should it not be the purpose of Bangladeshi political economists and analysts to pursue formation and development of actual national political party or parties which can effectively ensure regular free fair elections through balance of power? And if that is the purpose, then what could be a model for a Bangladeshi national political party? What are the attributes? What should be the organizational structure? What should be the financing model? And how can they engage and mobilize the masses to make the party in power feel the need for political reform? Do political economists have any insights or advice based on analysis to give, or is it just up to the enterprising, politically enthusiastic citizens to figure out by
I think
trial and
we
error?
got your question. It's about whether to hold a free and fair election on a regular basis and what kind of necessary reforms are needed. আপনাকে পরে পিছনে, is there anyone? Please. মাইক্রোফোনটা অফ আছে। Can I see any hand from any female participant? Please.
Mohammad Litur Hossain, MSS student, Department of Economics, Begonruka University, Rangpur. My question is to Mr. Chaudhary sir. Do you think that is started political affiliation of bureaucracy from recruitment process?
আমার মনে হয় আপনি বাংলায় বলেন, খুব দ্রুত বাংলায় বলেন, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই।
স্যার, যে আমলাতন্ত্রের প্রবেশ থেকেই তো রাজনীতির বীজ মানে সূচনা শুরু হয়। তখন থেকেই বিশেষ করে পিএইচসি সুপারিশ করার পর থেকেই অনুসন্ধান করা হয় কোন দলের সাথে সংশ্লিষ্ট
মানে
কি
আপনি
করে।
বলছেন রিক্রুটমেন্ট প্রসেসে কিভাবে পলিটিসাইজেশন
এখানেই পলিটিক্সের শুরু, এরপরে আর সমাধান আর কিভাবে হবে আপনি কিভাবে মনে করেন?
ঠিক আছে, ভেরি গুড কোশ্চেন। এনি ফিমেল পার্টিসিপেন্ট? ওকে, নো। মেল তো আছেই, সবসময় আছে। সো ওকে, প্লিজ। হ্যাঁ, ওটা না দিয়ে উপায় নেই, প্রথম আলো থেকে।
প্রথম আলোতে কাজ করি। তো একটা বিষয় যেটা দেবপ্রিয়দার বক্তব্যে এসছে, সেটা হচ্ছে যে মানে 18 ক বিআরও যেটা ব্যাংক রেজুলেশন অ্যাক্ট সংশোধন করে যেটা আইন করা হলো, সেখানে একটা আমার রিডিং হচ্ছে একটা অপশন তৈরি করা হয়েছে, মানে দ্যাট মিনস স্ট্র্যাটেজিক পার্টনার। সেটা হচ্ছে যে মানে যে কেউ এখানে এই পার্সেন্টেজ জমা দিয়ে আসতে পারবে, সেটা পুরনো হোক আর নতুন হোক। সেটা এখন অ্যাসালম গ্রুপ আর নাসা গ্রুপের যে বাস্তবতা, তাদের মানি লন্ডারিং এর নানান ঘটনা, তারপর তাদের বিদেশে মানে পালিয়ে থাকা, এসব বাস্তবতায় সত্যি কি তাদের পক্ষে কি আসা সম্ভব? বরং যে অপশনটা তৈরি করা হয়েছে সেটা যদি এমন হয় যে বিদেশি কোনো বিনিয়োগকারী অথবা দেশি কোনো ফ্রেশ বিনিয়োগকারী তাদের আসার যদি সুযোগ তৈরি করা হয়, সেক্ষেত্রে এটা কি আমরা ক্রিটিক্যালি দেখবো নাকি না? আমি চাই যে আমার এই রিডিংটাকে ভুল প্রমাণ করুন যে দেবপ্রিয় দারকে।
থ্যাংক ইউ, থ্যাংক ইউ। আমরা কিন্তু এই একটা রাউন্ডই কোশ্চেন নিচ্ছি। উই আর টেকিং অনলি ওয়ান রাউন্ড অফ কোশ্চেন্স, উই উইল নট হ্যাভ টাইম টু গেট গো টু দ্য সেকেন্ড রাউন্ড অফ কোশ্চেন্স। সো ইফ দেয়ার ইজ, আমি আপনার কাছে আসবো। ইজ দেয়ার এনি হ্যান্ড বিহাইন্ড? নো হ্যান্ডস? ওকে, প্লিজ ওনাকে একটু মাইক্রোফোনটা দাও। প্লিজ বি ভেরি ব্রিফ।
আমি অধ্যাপক মোহাম্মদ আব্দুল হাই এবং আমার গর্ব আমি একজন মুক্তিযোদ্ধা। দেবপ্রিয়দা তার মূল আর্টিকেলটি উনি রোমান্সিং দ্য রিফর্ম, তাই এটা একটু অনেক ব্যাখ্যা করেছেন অত্যন্ত সুন্দরভাবে। তো ওটা কি ওনার আশাহতের বেদনা নাকি? আর উনি নির্বাচনের ব্যাপারে একটা কথা বলেছেন যে দি ইলেকশন যেটা 26-এ হলো 12 তারিখে, এটা ইজ এ প্রেটি গুড ইলেকশন। আমি যেমন একটু হয়ে গেছি যে প্রেটি গুড এর মধ্যে উনি কি বোঝাতে চাইছেন, যদি একটু ব্যাখ্যা করেন। আর সবচেয়ে কথা হলো আমাদের কালচার তো হচ্ছে যে 90-তে যেটা রহমান সুমান স্যারের মাধ্যমে যে টাস্ক ফোর্স হয়েছে 29টা 4টা ভলিউমাস সেটা কিতাব রয়ে গেছে, করেনি। 96-তে টাস্ক ফোর্স হয়েছে বিভিন্নভাবে, করেনি। 2001-এ হয়েছে, করেনি। তো আমাদের তো কালচার তো হচ্ছে যে পলিটিক্যাল মাস্টার্সরা তারা যে যা বলিস ভাই, আমার অন্য কিছু চাই। তো এই যে অবস্থার মধ্যে যত এবং ডক্টর ইউনুস যখন হোয়াইট পেপার জন্য উনি যখন সাবমিট করে, তখন উনি বলেছিল যে এই হোয়াইট পেপার এত বড় গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, এটার মূল নির্যাসটা স্কুল কলেজের ছাত্রদেরকে পাঠ করা হবে। তো এই ধরনের কথাবার্তা এবং বাস্তবিক কি দাঁড়ালো, এই ব্যাপারটা যদি একটু বলে।
থ্যাংক ইউ, থ্যাংক ইউ। সো আমি জাস্ট গেইন ওকে, আমি পিছনে হাত দেখছি, প্লিজ।
হ্যালো, আমি সিনথিয়া রহমান, জাহাঙ্গীরনগর ইউনিভার্সিটিতে মাস্টার্স করছি ইকোনমিক্স ডিপার্টমেন্ট থেকে। আমার কোশ্চেনটা হচ্ছে যে চৌধুরী স্যার বললেন যে রিফর্ম স্লোডাউনের ক্ষেত্রে আমলাতন্ত্রটা অতটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ একটা ক্যাটালিস্ট না, কিন্তু আমার কথা হচ্ছে পলিটিক্যাল পার্টিগুলো 5 বছর পর পর চেঞ্জ হয়, সেক্ষেত্রে আমলাতন্ত্রে যারা আছে, যারা আমলারা আছেন, তারা একটা সার্টেন পিরিয়ড পর্যন্ত সাস্টেইন করে। সেক্ষেত্রে তারা যদি সুযোগ সন্ধানী হয়, সেক্ষেত্রে ডেভেলপমেন্টটা কিভাবে হবে বা কিভাবে সেটা স্লোডাউনের ক্ষেত্রে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা রাখে না।
থ্যাংক ইউ, থ্যাংক ইউ। পাশে কি আরেকটা হাত ছিল? Acha, sure. That is the last question we'll have.
স্যার আমি ইশরাত শারমিন যে প্রশ্নটা ছিল যে রেভলিউশন যেহেতু অটোমেটিক্যালি আমাদেরকে লিবারাল স্ট্যাটাস কোতে নিয়ে যায় না, তাহলে প্রোগ্রেসিভ বা লিবারাল স্ট্যাটাস কোর জন্য আসলে সলিউশনটা কি?
Thank you. So, Dr. Bhattacharya. Oh, madam, I'm sorry. আপনাকে আমি দেখিনি. Please. Madam, I was thinking I will come back to you probably at later stage, but anyway, please. এটাকে কেউ অফ করো না, হ্যাঁ, প্লিজ।
আচ্ছা, আমার একটা স্পেসিফিক প্রশ্ন মুসলিমউদ্দিন চৌধুরী সাহেবের কাছে, সেটা হচ্ছে যে ওই যে উনি বললেন যে ওই সিভিল সার্ভিস একটা লোকাল একটা সেন্ট্রাল, হ্যাঁ, হয়তো এটা নিয়ে অনেক আলোচনা হয়েছে, বাট আই ওয়াজ নট অ্যাওয়্যার অফ ইট। আপনি যদি একটুখানি এক্সপ্লেন করেন, এবং এটা কি ব্যুরোক্রেসির মধ্যেও অনেক সাপোর্ট আছে এই রকম ভাগ করার, নাকি এরকম ব্যুরোক্রেসি থেকেই একটা মানে একটা রেজিস্ট্যান্স হবে? আর দ্বিতীয় প্রশ্ন যেটা সবার কাছেই আছে, সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের দেশে আমরা সবসময় একটা ওই ব্লেম গেমের মধ্যে থাকি, অতএব সবসময় হয় পলিটিশিয়ানদেরকে একটা দোষ দেওয়া হচ্ছে, নয় আমলাতন্ত্রকে বা দেওয়া হচ্ছে, নয় সিভিল সোসাইটিকে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, কিন্তু যে কোনো কিংবা বিজনেসম্যানদের দেওয়া হচ্ছে। কিন্তু আসলে তো রিফর্মস যদি হতে হয়, তাহলে আসলে এই সব কয়টা অ্যাক্টরকেই ট্রুলি কমিটেড হয়ে তো রিফর্মটাকে আগিয়ে নিতে হবে। তাহলে এই ধরনের, এবং বিভিন্ন দেশে যেখানে হয়েছে এরকম একটা অ্যালায়েন্সের মধ্যে থেকে হয়েছে, যারা রিফর্ম মাইন্ডেড সব সেক্টরে ছিল। তো এটার সম্ভাবনা আমাদের দেশে কতটা, যে দেয়ার উড বি রিফর্ম মাইন্ডেড বিজনেস পিপল, রিফর্ম মাইন্ডেড সিভিল সার্ভেন্টস, রিফর্ম মাইন্ডেড পলিটিশিয়ানস, and reform-minded, মানে truly committed. অনেক তো কথা বলে, but truly committed. Thank you.
Madam, I really want to take the opportunity to ask you the question, because আমার সেটা হচ্ছে যে, madam, I have the question is that আপনি যে চারটা অ্যালায়েন্সের কথা, গ্রুপের কথা বলেন, what do you think, who would take the leadership?
সবসময় পলিটিশিয়ানদেরকে লিডারশিপ নিতে হবে।
Thank you, madam. So,
তারা জনবল, জনসমর্থন তাদেরকেই জোগাড় করতে হবে।
sure. So, I'll first start with Mr. Chaudhuri, and then I'll give Dr.
আমার মনে হয় প্রথমে অন্য কোয়েশ্চেনের চেয়ে আমার রংজাহান ম্যাডামের প্রশ্নটার উত্তরটাই দেওয়া উচিত। রেসিস্টেন্স was there, resistance there, and I'm sure resistance will be there. A strong political will can make it happen in very shortest possible time. Why? Let me give you some history. You know that আমার মনে হয় এটা খুব দৃষ্টতা হবে ইয়ে করা আপনার রিসার্চ এন্ড অল দিস দিয়ে। এক সময় আমাদের সার্কেল অফিসার ছিল, আপনার বাবাও ছিলেন। তো সার্কেল অফিসার ওয়াজ এ সেপারেট স্ট্রিম টোটালি। এটা এরা একেবারে লাস্টের দিকে গিয়ে তারা সেন্ট্রাল সার্ভিসের মধ্যে, ইন্ডিয়াতে এখনো স্টেট সার্ভিস আছে, যদি বা ইন্ডিয়াতে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টের সার্ভিস আলাদা করা হয়নি। রাইট, ফেডারেশন, রাইট। না, আমরা ইউনিটারি, but at the same time we have a unit at the local government, though not province, but it's a government within government. এটাকে রিকগনাইজ করতে হবে বাই ল, কারণ লতে এখন আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি আরো গ্যাপ বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। লটাকে স্ট্রিমলাইন করতে হবে এবং লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট সার্ভিসটাকে আলাদা স্ট্রিম করে আলাদা করতে হবে, এবং একটা মাঝখানে একটা কন্ডিউট দিতে হবে। এটা আমি কন্ডিউটটার নাম বলতে চাচ্ছি লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কমিশন। আমার মনে হয় স্যার, এই যে আমাদের 2006-07 ক্যাটাগরি লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কমিশন দিয়ে পরে, যেটা গভর্নমেন্ট আওয়ামী লীগ গভর্নমেন্ট এসে এটা আর পাস করলো না, লোকাল শওকত আলী খান অ্যান্ড আমাদের প্রফেসর তোফাইল সাহেব, লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কমিশনের মধ্যে রিসোর্স অ্যালোকেশনস, বেঞ্চমার্কিং, মেকিং অল লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট, তাদের মধ্যে কম্পিটিশন আনা, এবং আর্টিকেল 59-60 ট্রুলি এস্টাবলিশ করতে গেলে আপনাকে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট সার্ভিসকে প্লেস করতে হবে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টের পলিটিক্যাল মাস্টারদের হাতে। অ্যান্ড মাঝখানে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কমিশনটাকে ব্যুরোক্রেটিক ইয়ে না করে এটা প্রফেশনালি যদি করা হয়, এদের কাজ ফান্ড অ্যালোকেশন ডিস্ট্রিবিউশনস টেকিং অল দি প্যারামিটার্স ইন্টু পলিসি প্যারামিটার্স ইন্টু কনসিডারেশন, এইটা অপশন। এবং আমার হিসাবে এটার জন্য আর কোনো ফার্দার রিফর্ম কমিশন করার দরকার নেই। অলরেডি দিস প্রপোজালস আর দেয়ার থ্রু ডিফারেন্ট কমিশনস, এগুলো জাস্ট বের করে এনে স্ট্রং, এই গভর্নমেন্টের কিন্তু এই স্ট্রেংথটা আছে। এই যে বলা হল পলিটিসাইজেশন অফ ব্যুরোক্রেসি, আমি মনে করি লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট কমিশন আর লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট সার্ভিস সেপারেটেড ফ্রম দি সেন্ট্রাল গভর্নমেন্ট সার্ভিস, এটা এই একটা স্ট্রাইকে কিন্তু অনেক পলিটিসাইজেশন এখানে মিনিমাইজ হতে পারে। আরেকটা জিনিস যেটা বলেছে, সুপারিশের পর থেকে না, সুপারিশ থেকেই শুরু হয় পলিটিসাইজেশন। আমার মনে কারেকশন করে দিচ্ছি আপনার এটার কারণটা কি? PSC is an independent constitutional body. They are not part of the executive government. ওইটাকে যদি আমি স্ট্রাকচারালি বাই ল, বাই সিলেকশন অফ দি PSC মেম্বার্স এন্ড চেয়ারম্যান, এটাকে যদি আর্ম লেন্থে নিয়ে রাখি, তাহলে তো সুপারিশের সময় পলিটিসাইজেশন হবে না। কাজে আপনি কি জানেন যে PSC চেয়ারম্যান অনেক সময় মিনিস্ট্রিতে গিয়ে ডেপুটি সেক্রেটারি চেয়ারে বসে, সামনে গিয়ে বসে থাকতে হয়। অবশ্য PSC চেয়ারম্যানকে মিনিস্ট্রি দেখারই কথা না, PSC চেয়ারম্যান বাদ দেন, মেম্বারকেও দেখার কথা না, কারণ মেম্বার এন্ড চেয়ারম্যান দে আর কনস্টিটিউশনাল ফাংশনারি, দে আর নট পার্ট অফ দি সিভিল সার্ভিস, অ্যান্ড তাদেরকে দেখাই যাবে না।
বাজেট তো দেন আপনি।
না, আমি ওইটা বলো, তাহলে কি ইনস্টিটিউশনটাকে স্ট্রেংথটা করতে হবে কি, তার অ্যাডমিনিস্ট্রেটিভ 3 ফাংশনসকে এক জায়গায় আনতে হবে, ফাইন্যান্স, ফাংশনারি, ফান্ড। 3F কে যদি এক জায়গায় এনে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্ট করা হয়, PSC করা হয়, অডিটর জেনারেল করা হয়, ইলেকশন কমিশন করা হয়, 3টা F কে এক জায়গায় আনা, এই রিকমেন্ডেশনস অলরেডি দেয়ার থ্রু ডিফারেন্ট রিফর্ম কমিশনস। Only thing that you don't need to form it. Even I tend to disagree with the নতুন ইকোনমিক রিফর্ম কমিশন। আমি একটু অ্যাড করব, ইকোনমিক রিফর্ম কমিশন হবে, নট অ্যাজ এ রিকমেন্ডিং অথরিটি উইথ এক্সিকিউটিভ পাওয়ার।
Want to put up a parallel cabinet?
No. Executive power within the government system. Commission will work, but recommendation will be considered. In many cases, in some cases it can be dropped, but in many cases that recommendation should be implemented immediately. Things are already known.
Yes.
That's the main thing. Things are already known. Only thing that to bring it a confidence to the system, you make some professional conduit to recommend to the government, and government will have the political will to implement that. That's the easy answer. এবং that's আমার মনে হয় this is the high time. এইবার যদি না হয় হবে না। আর আমি ফখরুলের কোশ্চেনটা, ওই যে প্রথম আলোর কোশ্চেনটা একটু নিতে চাচ্ছিলাম, রেজলিউশন
বিসিএস রাজনীতি করা যায় কি?
বিশেষ রাজনীতি, আমার মনে হয় এটা ফান হিসাবে নিলাম আপনার কথাটাকে। হ্যাঁ, এটা তো সিস্টেমে তো ফিট করবে না। যাই হোক, আপনার ইয়েটা আমি বুঝেছি, সার্কাজমটা বোঝা গেছে। আচ্ছা, আমাদের ফখরুল সাহেবের প্রথম আলোর ওনার এইটা একটা আলাদা। আমি অবশ্য একটু 18A নিয়ে আপনারা সবাই ক্রিটিসাইজ করছেন, কিন্তু 18A পুরাটা যদি পড়েন তাহলে আমার মনে হয় এন্ট্রি উইল নট বি দ্যাট মাচ ইজি। ওইখানে আপনারা 18A-তে আরেকটা জায়গা বলা আছে, অল লায়াবিলিটি শুড বি টেকেন ওভার অ্যান্ড ডিপোজিটরদের পেমেন্ট করে দিতে হবে, ওগুলা কন্ডিশনগুলো সব ওর মধ্যে আছে। তা আমি জানি না ওই কন্ডিশনগুলো দিয়ে এখন
আমি আপনাকে জিজ্ঞেস করি, ওই কন্ডিশনের সিকোয়েন্সটা কি? আগে পেমেন্ট দিতে হবে নাকি পরে পেমেন্ট দিতে হবে?
প্রথম সিকোয়েন্স আপনি কারেক্ট। প্রথমে 7.5% দিয়ে গভর্নমেন্টের 35,000 এর মধ্যে 92.5% এটা নিয়ে নিল, ধরে নিলাম। কিন্তু ওই ডিপোজিটরদের যে অলরেডি 165,000 ডিপোজিটরদের আছে, এই পেমেন্টটা ওই সেকশনের মধ্যে দেওয়া আছে। তো এখন আমি জানি না, এটা তো আমি মনে করি
সিকোয়েন্সিংটা খুব পরিষ্কার না,
এটা পরিষ্কার না, এটা একটা ইস্যু আছে। তো এটা অল্টারনেটিভ একটা রুট হিসেবে রেখেছে, কিন্তু এই রুটটা আমার হিসাবে ইজ বাউন্ড টু ফেল। কারণ ইফ ইউ লুক এট দ্য রিড বিটুইন দ্য লাইন্স অফ দ্যাট সেকশন, এটা ইন্টেনশনটা হয়তো এমন হতে পারে নট দ্যাট মাচ ফেয়ার, বাট আলটিমেটলি আমার মনে হয় এটাকে ম্যাটেরিয়ালাইজ করার সময়। তো আমার মনে হয় আমার আর প্রশ্ন উত্তর নেই। পলিটিসাইজেশন অফ ব্যুরোক্রেসি, আমার মনে হয় দ্য লেডি যেটা বলছেন, এটা পলিটিসাইজেশন স্টার্ট ফ্রম দি উইক পলিটিক্যাল উইল। Bureaucracy, politicization start from the weak political will.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. Dr. Bhattacharya, please.
I would like to thank those who have really put in the questions. Please give a big hand to those who have been listening to us inside. And a bigger hand to those who did not ask questions and saved the time on that. So, number of issues. No? Let me come back to first with Nepal, whatever I know of it. And give a big hand to Nepal and for their success. And their early success are quite visible. At CPD, we are now writing a paper, we're making a comparative analysis among the three countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, because all of them have some kind of similarity in the recent past. We are doing our work on that. Hopefully someday at SANEM conference, we will be able to present that. So if you look at the Nepalese experience, there are reforms and there are also public behavior. And if you look at the public behavior of the leadership, that is quite strikingly different. Our current leader is trying to do that, but there is a lot to learn from the rapper prime minister over there on that, from their social behavior and the political conduct in many ways. So if you look at the Nepalese experience, they have we usually sequence our reforms like you have the systemic reforms, you have the economy-wide policy, and then you have sectoral approach and others. And what really matters to people is the public service delivery. And public service, without a public service delivery improvement, reaching out to the stakeholders, all other theoretical reforms in the institutions will not carry much public support in that. I see till now that the public attitude is positive because they are feeling the results in many ways. In Bangladesh, for example, if the ministers do not stop the cars in the traffic signals and they pass with their pilot car, that itself, dismisses all other reforms in many cases. So I would agree that in Nepalese case, that public service delivery, whether it is cleaning up the capital or anything else, traffic management and others, that is very important in terms of having one of the important components of whenever we do the reforms on that. My young colleague, politician, I think you have done the breaking away from NCP, isn't it? Didn't that? You are the group? Yes. Huh? Yes. Yes. So you know it better by being there, creating your own party. You call it an alliance, isn't it? Apnar ki naam diyechen? Huh? Network. So that is a very humble title. You should call yourself political party and get into the game and put in more pluralism, new ideas, more competition in the politics through that and the new generation in that way, and make your ideological and value system more explicit. One of the major problems with your other party was that there was multiple ideology moving around, and we have understood age cannot be a party. You have to have values and philosophies and everything else. And for that, you cannot have just programs. You need to have the basic values on the basis of which the party is to be distinguished from others in that way. So I welcome the initiative which you have shown. I've had the privilege of talking to some of your colleagues too. And we look into that they will create more pluralism, more competition, more, performance-related thing. I wonder whether you're going to fight for the local government elections in the coming days. That is, We hope to. We hope to. Very good. So local government election, both in the municipalities and corporation, but also in the upazilas as they are coming up. That is your challenge I can see over there. On the banking sector, there are a number of issues. One is the reforms, and I fully agree with Mr. Chaudhary that we don't need to rediscover America over here. We have it already documented in many ways, and it is now about implementation and execution. So a reform commission is more about a reform delivery commission. It's a reform delivery commission, not a reform articulation commission. So that is what I would think so. Why the government is taking so much time, I don't know. Because what they need to do is that, to do a consolidation at this moment, Chaudhary Sahib has also said what the fiscal situation with no fiscal space at this moment. It is narrowing down every other day. So what is important is for consolidation. And for the consolidation, if you cannot have new money, what you need to have is more efficiency. So instead of more money, you will have to go for more efficiency in the coming days. আরো দক্ষতা লাগবে। অর্থ যদি না থাকে দক্ষতা দিয়ে তা পূরণ করতে হয়। এই দক্ষতা আনতে হলেই কিন্তু সংস্কার লাগবে। ওই সংস্কারের জায়গার বাস্তবায়নের জায়গাগুলোকে পরিষ্কার করতে হবে এইটার ভিত্তিতে। এবং যেই চ্যালেঞ্জটা এখানে আছে যে নির্বাচিত সরকার, pretty good election. It could have been very good if it had been more inclusive, but at this moment it is pretty good. সেটার ভিত্তিতে সেই জায়গাটাতে যাওয়ার একটা জায়গা আছে। এখন আমার বন্ধু, প্রথম আলোর বন্ধু যিনি বলেছেন আর কি, দেখুন আপনারা till now, I am now putting on the table why I am so worried about it. আপনি চৌধুরী সাহেব বললেন যে you gave an interpretation. Where did you get this interpretation?
No, not interpretation. I didn't say, I say gave the interpretation of the constitution provision of other
No. The resolution. No, but you see, every language demands interpretation from the political point of view. Till now, koi? Fakrul koi? So till now, that interpretation you gave, that somebody else can buy it, where did you get this? No, it is your interpretation. Yes. Do you have a political interpretation? Did the government explain it to you? Why did they bring it in? I am trying to say, the ghorpora goru to sindure meg dekhle bhoy paয়.
In that case, actually, knowledge.
So my point is that I have just said yesterday and day before yesterday, we need a political statement on this. We need a discussion in the parliament on this. No AMLA or a researcher should interpret this. They should interpret it why they have brought it in at the last moment. আপনি যেটা বলছেন, আমি যেটা, উনি যেটা বলছেন বা অন্যরা যেটা বলছেন, এটা তো আমাদের সদিচ্ছার ব্যাখ্যা আমরা দিচ্ছি। The political masters should explain it in the parliament and also give a statement. যে এই কারণে এটা করেছি এবং এইটাকে মাধ্যমে আমরা একটা বিকল্প সমাধানের পথ খোঁজার জন্য এটা করেছি। I have no problem. Even the central bank governor did not give a statement on that. So they will have to tell that instead of trying to give our own interpretation in that. I believe in political interpretation, and that is a commitment that the other oligarchs will not come back. That commitment should come politically. এবং it is not only that, it's not today it is bank, tomorrow it will be media, day after tomorrow it will be the import of oils and LNGs. So it is all over. It is not only limited to banks. So we have seen that. In আমার সেই জায়গাটাতে আমার বক্তব্য। I am looking forward to a political interpretation to this issue and why the political masters are silent about it. That brings you to the whole reform issue. That if you do not have a reform delivery issue, and not being, you don't understand at this moment the crisis we are in, আর আপনি আমাকে আবার 5 বছরের মধ্যে ঢুকাচ্ছেন পঞ্চম বর্ষবার্ষিক পরিকল্পনার জন্য, দুঃখজনকভাবে না, আমি সম্মানজনকভাবে I am also a member of that committee. So, but the issue is that it is time to do the consolidation and reforms at this moment in order to move into the next step. Without having the Rajaswa nai, without revenues, without the quality public expenditure, without a balanced financing of the budget deficit, kothay jabo? Eta to it's again I have mentioned it. It's a surreal budget, parabasto, which doesn't exist. We know very well there is water of 20-25% in the expenditure projection and also in the revenue projection, as it happens with the NBR and others in that way. The problem is, if an elected government does not keep to its promises of reforms and others, then unfortunately, those who are not citizens of this country are going to impose it on us. That is exactly what is going to happen. And then you will see it is not exactly a strong government. It becomes a weak government. Look at me now. Now IMF is coming and telling you are not doing your compliances and reforms. And we, our first 2 months, the signs are not very strong. So if the signs are not very strong, why should you get into a new one? So we will redesign the whole program now and bring in a new program on which you will be able to deliver or will be forced to deliver. It is very disheartening, if not insulting, that we cannot really generate our own reforms within. and on which there is a total unity of opinion in this case in the country between the professionals and the politicians and the delivery bureaucrats on that matter. I find we are in a very important crossroad at this moment in our country's history, when the new government has come, and whether it is going to, the early signals are going to show the day or not. That is, I think the government should seriously think about how they are behaving at this moment. I think I have said enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Thank you so much. Now we'll hear the
And
final
on
words.
regarding the DNA, if you please read
Yeah.
the white paper, how the businessmen, particularly in the Prime Minister's office, that first they see that deals are being made with the politicians and the businessmen, and then they see that they are signing it up, and then they think, why can't I have part of it? And then they give their son a contract to be on the project, and then finally he himself becomes the MP in the next elections on that. Haven't you seen those things? So ওনাদের মনের ভিতরেও আকাঙ্ক্ষা জাগে, ওরা করতেছে আমার হাতের উপর দিয়ে, আমি তো এটা করতে পারি. Why should I not? I would reduce the transaction cost by being the agent myself instead of being the sub-agent. So that some of your senior colleagues have shown us the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Capital market one of the major areas which we have suggested, and I have taken it to the finance minister, is that offloading some of the shares. And offloading the shares in that way, not only in the multinationals, but also in the state enterprises. I am pretty sure Professor Remansovan will not agree with me on these issues, on that. And that would have really killed two birds in the one stone. What? You offload all these cases and you get some money at this moment selling the family silvers. On the other hand, you give good shares into the market and make it more vibrant on that. I put it to the finance minister that you had been the president of the Chittagong Stock Exchange, founding chair. If you cannot do it, this is an issue from the Saifur Rahman's days when when the bureaucrats, they sit in the sit in the committees over there and get some preferences over there, and also the children get their jobs, and so that is why there is the bureaucratic resistance in terms of offloading the shares. I have put a challenge to the finance minister whether you can deliver it or not in the coming days, but this budget could have solved this problem up to a point, apart from other reforms, by putting good viable shares into the market to improve the depth of the capital market at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya. Can we give a big hand to Dr. Bhattacharya? So now we will listen from Professor Remansovan. I think he has heard, and he has been talking on these things for decades.
Yes.
And so I think, sir, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. To begin with, let me once again compliment Salim Rehan and his colleagues in SANEM for bringing together this valuable international conference. What is particularly commendable, I think you have mentioned this, is that you have created a forum around the region for bringing young researchers together to, in fact, test out their skills and provide a window to publicize their own research work. I think this is very commendable and you should go on doing this. I would like to also... I would suggest that perhaps you should hold some sort of a competition amongst the presenters and identify perhaps the 4 or 5 best papers presented in each of the sessions and give them some public recognition. This will create a competitive environment for improving the quality of research to be presented in future conferences. Secondly, I would like to compliment my colleague Debopriya for an excellent presentation on the issue of reforms. It is a tour de force. He has looked at the literature, the concepts, the experiences, and then eventually brought this down to the issue of reforms in Bangladesh. Inevitably, much of the focus in the discussions have then been focused on the issues of reforms in Bangladesh, which to some extent has detracted attention, because this is, at the end of the day, an academic conference. And academic discussion on the whole trajectory of the reform process as conceptualized and articulated from historical experience would have been extremely valuable for purposes of discussion. Perhaps some other occasion this could happen. Since the focus of attention and discussion has been on the Bangladesh experience, I suppose your expectation would be that this is where I should concentrate my concluding remarks. Now, I don't know how many, apart from the Secretary himself, has actually sat in government and been through the process of actually overseeing reforms. Because then you get a good sense of who wants reforms, who resists reforms, and why reforms don't get satisfactorily implemented. For all of you, to a large extent, this remains an academic issue, or as citizens, you read about it in newspapers, and occasionally you become victims of the failure to implement reforms. Specifically over here, I remember when I was in the Planning Commission many years ago, the central experience I experienced was not getting reforms legislated, it was getting reforms implemented. And implementation is again a process. Devopriyo has attempted to sequence that process. But the bottom line, eventually for the measure of a reform, is when it is actually delivering on the ground. I mean, if you want a police reform, to give you an example, and one of the reforms is that you want accountable police, and they will be mandated to register cases when people come and file a case in a police station. 2 years from now, even today, journalists should go and file cases in police stations and see how readily that particular reform has been actually implemented. So that will be the measure of actual reform taking place. Many of the reforms, particularly those which originate from our development partners, the World Bank and the IMF, which are today being put on the table and are being made conditional so that we can then access successive tranches of the IMF loan, are very old reforms. They were on the table going back to perhaps the first tenure of Saifur Rahman, and they were reprocessed over successive regimes. Now, what has actually been the experience with this? You have some progress up to a point. You play the game because you are desperate to get your first and second tranches. The World Bank or even the IMF are desperate to disburse. After all, the only way in which you measure their performance is not that they are actually carrying out reforms, but that they're actually disbursing the money which they have accumulated from their international investors or governments. So there is a mutual interest in eventually playing the game over showing that reforms are being implemented. I remember in the it would be in the early 1990s, the World Bank initiated an extensive process of reforms of the judiciary. Also in the 90s, the UK government initiated a long process for financing budgetary reforms. Perhaps you were even involved in that particular process. Now, no one bothered to reflect and review the outcome of all those successive reforms. When I look at the current state of the judicial system over here and the way in which we have seen the judiciary being instrumentalized by ruling parties to serve their particular interests, obviously all the efforts which were made and what were then proclaimed to the Board of Governors of the World Bank as the success of the judicial reforms initiated will all have come to nothing at all, because you are back to square one over here. And again, no doubt resources will be invested for having a second round of judicial reforms. Similarly, on budgetary reforms, I remember looking at some of the content of the budgetary reforms, and critical issues like introduction, the whole issue of integration of the revenue in the development budget was suggested in the 1990s. In fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was even in the agenda during Pakistan times. And the fact that you are still making this request today in 2026 indicates that someone has to give us an explanation of why this very elementary action and could not take place, because it is manifestly inefficient arrangement, and it makes monitoring public expenditure much more difficult. Again, for many years, I have been suggesting at the nashtas organized by the finance minister, where he invites economists to advise him on the budget, that why don't you introduce some form of performance budgeting, where essentially you identify the outcomes you are seeking from particular acts of public expenditure. This has been in practice in Southeast Asian countries since the 1970s and 80s. Why in the 21st century are you not in a position to introduce this? This will give me a measure of telling the people and the parliament that, okay, this is what I promised to do with public money in the budget. These are the outcomes which have come out of that process. Now, what happens is that you produce a budget, you say how that budget was utilized, you don't give anything at all about what outcomes came out of that process. So there is no way that you are going to introduce efficiency of performance. Now, year after year, you are all observing that the health budget and the education budget are underutilized. Everyone is dreaming about raising public expenditure shares to 5 and 6% of health, but you are not spending the 2% which is allocated. Now, no one has come up with any expenditure, any practical analysis, and I blame also civil society's failures over here, as to why both these ministries have been underperforming in terms of their utilization. What are the nature of the problems? No one actually knows this after so many years of public failure in these areas. At the same time, every citizen is experiencing low quality health care in public facilities. Everyone year after year is talking about the poor quality of public education, even when we are reporting on high performances in terms of pass rates and getting high-level results over there. But when you receive graduates coming out of the system, you become aware as to how ill-educated they are. And again, we are not really being able to satisfactorily address these issues. So you are dealing, therefore, when I say that you are dealing with the whole series of problems, these are not actually reform problems. These are really problems of implementation and the way in which the state functions. IMF agendas are not reforms. They are simply exercises in getting the government to actually perform better. And we confuse this with reforms and go on repeating these as reform programs. Now, for the more substantive reforms of the sort which Devapriya was actually talking about, if you come and look at this particular process, questions that have to be asked is, who actually wants reforms? People who are contesting elections, they have a long manifesto of reforms they want to carry out. Every government does that. I have prepared several manifestos. Devapriya must have prepared one or two in his time. We wanted reforms. Does the government want reform, for which we are recommending these reforms? Someone in there does. But have you been able to identify the key players within the government, the coalition inside that government, who is willing to then take these reforms and make this into a political campaign issue within the party and then subsequently the electorate? Now, one of the most successful reform agendas ever proposed in our contemporary history was the Choi Dafa program. Now, this was a real reform to reform the constitutional basis of the Pakistan state. And it was led by Bongo Bandhu, and it was delivered as a message to every citizen in what then constituted East Pakistan, so that you created a constituency in support of Choi Dafa. When that was then accepted and voted on in the election, this was then very seriously addressed, because once you reform on paper has to become a reform which can be implemented. And we sat and held detailed discussions, Bongo Bandhu, his leadership, and some of us who were his advisors, on how to then incorporate this into the constitution and then present it to the incoming Constituent Assembly as a proposal for reforming the constitution. It was the failure to accept that process which culminated in the massive mobilization led by Bongo Bandhu in March of 1971 and the capture of power by Bongo Bandhu in the creation of an independent Bangladesh during the month of March 1971, which culminated in the Liberation War. But that was a process in which you seek to mobilize an entire nation behind reforms. Now, in all the reforms that we are talking about, including the reform agenda of 31 points, which the BNP government has put on the table, have they made any serious effort to conscientize the party and the elected representatives and the voters about these reforms? What I find, for example, in election after election, the ruling party or even the opposition, when they put reforms on the table, this is a paper exercise in which most of their members who are contesting the elections, if they were exposed to have an exam on the party manifesto, they would all get fail marks because they have no idea what was its content. So therefore, they are not a political party which is performing reforms, has made no real attempts to mobilize its own work, its own elected representatives behind that reform process. Nor have they made any effort to educate the party workers on these reforms and to then ask them to go out and to take that message. In the campaign leading up to the elections of December 1971, party workers were going down to every single village with Choi Dafa, and you had a table of contents presented in every village to tell people what these reforms are about. So this is how a reform should actually be carried out. Now, in India, some of the interesting reforms which are carried out, such as right to food, right to education, right to work, broad civil society coalitions were mobilized. Here again, I take civil society representatives, and all of us are sitting here to task, that we have not been able to build such coalitions behind particular reform processes because we are not ever united sufficiently. We are in our 50 different fundraising silos, really generating resources which culminate in alochanas of this nature. What we are not doing is mobilizing constituencies on the ground behind real reforms and generating such pressure on both politicians and prospective elected members, and then on the parliament itself to carry out particular reforms. Now, if you want reforms on particular areas, again, you have to play an upfront role and build such constituencies to carry out those reforms. Because outside of your effort, there are much stronger coalitions who do not want reform. Now, everyone is talking about banking reforms, and everyone has suddenly discovered that all we need is to deal with a few crony capitalists, and everything will be well. We are talking about banking reform since Zia's time. He was the first major defaults in the development finance institutions took place in the Zia Rahman regime. And in those days when I was in BIDS, we identified, quantified, and suggested that you needed banking reforms. And this alochana has been going on. Devopriya has been part of this process for successive regimes, with Irshad, with Khaleda Zia and Saifur Rahman, with Sheikh Hasina. We were telling Saifur Rahman on the eve of the 1996 elections, after the first Khaleda regime, that one of the issues you must do is that you must make sure that defaulters do not contest elections. In the early stage, he is fully agreeable to that. That is the law. But 2 weeks before the elections, he will pass a law or an order saying that defaulters can contest elections if they make a down payment of 5%, and then their loans can then be rescheduled. And this has been done election after election. So here again, you have got constituencies which are then subsequently captured in parliament and represented in parliament. And you get into a situation in which you have a large constituency who are sitting there as defaulters, who have not repaid the loans they committed to pay when they were permitted to contest election after down payment, and who will ensure that no reforms will take place over there. So can anyone remember, you are young, older people, as to whether we have ever had a very serious debate in any successive parliament on the issue of bank default? So if this is now embedded into the DNA of our financial system, why are we thinking that just by identifying a few crony capitalists and putting all our heavyweight gunfire on them, this is going to address a problem which has become embedded in our economy? You have to think about this. Are we also joining into a game where we are simplifying it and thinking that if we deal with this, this will solve the problem? Let me sum this up then and see that moving beyond legislation, moving beyond identification of reform, this was the great shortcoming of the interim government exercise, that they went through this whole extensive reform process, which was actually carried out not by the interim government. It was actually, the reforms were identified and initiated by a special commission. And there was really no buy-in, so we never had any idea from the interim government and its head, actually, that what are my reform priorities and where am I going to invest my political capital? So these reforms were then put on the table, And it was assumed that these were reforms, but they were not reforms. Because reforms, as we are now discovering, have to be legislated. Even the ones which have been legislated and enacted into law have to then be translated into operational documents, which can then be implemented by the bureaucracy and the machinery of government. And then after they have been implemented, we then have to measure their outcomes on the ground. So there is a whole process. And if you want to know whether reforms have actually been taking place, you can't hold this government accountable today. You can only test them 2 years or 3 years down the line when you are seeing which of these reforms are actually being implemented and they're being effectively implemented. So finally, we see then that who are going to be the custodians of reforms? Hopefully we now have an active opposition in Parliament. Instead of pursuing them about the July Charter, the real action should be to get themselves organized to collaborate with civil society, perhaps with the trackers initiated by Debapriyo's platform, to see then how the reforms are being implemented on the ground, and to organize their party and a much broader coalition to then constantly be exercising the role of watchdog over reform. That is a far more sensible and efficient and politically purposeful way of actually performing their role as the opposition. At the end of the day, the government of the day has to have the niyat for reforms, the real intention. That is the operative issue. Do they actually want reforms? If they want reforms, they will be taking the initiative to carry on reforms. And they will then be accepting and setting up their own measures of accountability. If they are ready for reforms, then they have to create the capacity for reforms. The whole process of accountability, right from the Prime Minister's Secretariat down to the ground level, to see that those reforms are being carried out. Those will demonstrate the actual niyat for carrying out reforms. If none of those processes are put there, then you will think that these are going to be nominal reforms, which you are wanting to show that you have carried out, but whether they will be actually delivering anything will be determined by the way in which you set about this process. The ultimate accountability is that the government has to deliver and then be willing to put their delivery process fully on test through a free and fair and inclusive election process. If you are a student of politics of Bangladesh, you will notice I have been observing politics since pre-Bangladesh times, going back to the Ayub regime. From then in 1958 up to 1976, only one government has actually transferred power through a free and fair election process, where this process took place through the constitutional process. How many of you people can name that government? Anyone here? No, not at all. Fail. Anyone else can name that government? No, fail again. All those changes took place as an outcome of Andolan. The only person who has transferred power constitutionally through a free and fair election was Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League government in 2001, when under a caretaker system it contested elections, was defeated by Khaleda Zia, BNP, and handed over power to them. That is the objective reality which I mention not for handing out any compliments to anyone, but to point out how difficult it is for ultimate exercise of accountability where an incumbent government is willing to test its performance on the ground through contesting a free and fair election. Until that situation is fully institutionalized and injected into the political DNA of the people of Bangladesh and the politics of Bangladesh, there will always be a problem of implementation of reforms. Because until a government feels that it is going to be tested on its record of both reform and implementation, the commitment to that reform process is always going to be lukewarm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we had such an excellent discussion today in this kind of panel, very special panel we had. And we are so fortunate to have these distinguished people in our panel. So from Sanem, we are very much thankful to them. And please give a big round of applause to, big round of hand to all of them. So with this, I would like to conclude the session, and I invite you all for the lunch. Thank you.